welcome to Keda's Room. Today we're going to review an article called Submissive versus Slave. I would like to say hi to the sirs. Hi Sir Frankie, Sir Neroli, and Sir Mars. I was given the article Submissive versus Slaves. This article was very educational for myself. I learned some different ways on what makes some different things that makes a slave and a submissive. I learned why a master would want a slave. I learned why a master would choose a slave over a submissive to manage a project. I also think that this article could be helpful to anyone that would want to learn more about slaves versus submissives and what makes up the two. Some points to go over from the article. The article brings up the power exchange. With a slave, a master has complete control and authority over a slave in all areas and all times, even when they are not actually not in a scene. That even though the master has the control and the authority or anything over a slave, that a slave still has the right to say no to the master if the order is to be self-harmed or against the law, or it causes anything with these lines, that she has the right to say no. That even though that a master and slave relationship has these boundaries, it doesn't weaken them, it makes them stronger. Just to remember real life and restrictions. Some of the best ways that one way I can explain how I was taught some ways to understand the difference between a sub and a slave. Using a real life situation. So my boss, he works Monday to Friday. Even if he shows up, or if he does show up and sits in the back room, he gets a paycheck no matter what. For me or a coworker to receive our paycheck, we have to literally go to the work, show up, and do our job. So to use those two, my boss would be the submissive, and myself or the co-workers would be the slaves. Some differences between a slave and the submissives. The slaves, they're a long-term commitment, so stating that it's going to take years to be with your master, to know what your master likes and what they desire and everything else. It doesn't happen overnight. A slave is devoted to our master. A slave has constant obedience. The slave focuses on the needs and desires of her master. Where a submissive, with those four things, a submissive, there doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's no devotion to the master, no constant obedience, and no focus on the desires or the needs of the master. Like, these things are not an always occurring thing. That it does happen, but it's not all the time. Where with a slave, it is all the time. It's constant. It's there. It's always there. There is a part in the article that I do like, that it talks about how slavery is not for all submissives, that if you are not able to accept slavery, that it's okay, that there is no huge line or law stating that you have to be a slave. I learned about cyber subs, that some people in the online world only play as a submissive, and that their submission does not go outside this online world. When I honestly thought I heard about cyber subs, I thought of a robot or a doll that you would find on Second Life that you use for sex. And then another way that I could explain the understanding between a sub and a slave, I want to use a blindfold for an example of the trust that a slave gets over to a master. Thinking about it, like the trust that you give into someone over like a final decision. Like a slave makes decisions and does things. It's just that final decision is left up to the master. So that's something that you would naturally do yourself. Your master does. And so I'm going to use the blindfold for the example that the blindfold is given to the slave, is put over her eyes. She doesn't question, she doesn't remove, and she does not trust that her master is not going to lead her down the wrong path or is not going to harm her or anything along these lines. Whereas if you take the as a submissive, that a submissive is given the blindfold, but chooses where and how much control is given over to the master. That if she puts the blindfold on, it's for this period of time, and then this is where they play it, and so on and so on. That there is still trust there, but it's a different level. That the submissive still has the final say of her own self. So there's this part in the article that I had a hard time to understand. So I'm going to read you it. It says, often masters feel more at ease to use a slave to manage a project than they would a submissive. I couldn't understand why a master would, but as it was explained to me, it actually made sense. That a master would use a slave over a submissive. A slave is going to know a master to the T on what he wants and how he wants it done. A submissive is going to get confused, overwhelmed. So it's going to make the task a little bit harder to complete. What I learned from this article is that no matter if it is tomorrow, 10 years from now, that people will always have the talk about slave versus submissive, or how one may define themselves, but to another person is going to be defined as something else. That slavery is not for everyone, and that it is okay. That slaves have also the right to say no. I learned that slavery is something much deeper than what I thought it was originally to start with. My overall thoughts on this article is, well, that I understand slavery and I understand submissives a lot more. I also understand why some of the dominants choose submissives, or why a dominant would want to choose a slave. It's all in preference and what one would want. I think this article could be helpful to anyone that was looking into the differences, or some differences, between slave and submissive. But either way, I looked this article. I learned a lot. And thank you.